Love, exciting and new.
Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever.
It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships of Bermudan and British Registry.
Hi, I'm Matt Berninger of the National, and this is the LSQ Podcast.
Hey, it's Jenny LSQ. Welcome to episode 52 of LSQ. And yes, you may know Matt Berninger best as the frontman of the National, but in this conversation we talk about his individual creative journey and his gorgeous debut solo album, Serpentine Prison. Let's get into it.
So I didn't actually have any intention to do a solo album. What I wanted to do and what I started doing was making a covers record with Booker T. Jones, and I wanted to cover a bunch of songs and make a covers collection for a long time. There's so many people I love Cat Power, her covers records, and Stardust by Willie Nelson is one of my favorite records, and Booker produced and arranged that. And anyway, so I reached out to him because I'd met him about 12 years ago. And I was, I was lucky and just cosmically blessed that he remembered me and said yes. And so we started this sort of process of making a covers album. And along the way, I gave him the two I mentioned, Love So Little and Distant Axis. And he really liked those. And then he's like, what else is there? And then I had a few others that were half baked, and pretty soon I had shared, I shared, about 12 or so originals with him, demos, just like really rough stuff. And he thought we should focus on those, not put aside the covers album idea, but to do both. And so by the time we got into the studio last summer, I had about 12 pretty finished songs, originals, and we did 7 or I don't know, 6 or 7 covers, and then towards the end of that process, I didn't want to put out a giant record, although now I've released it all as the deluxe, so I guess I did put out a giant record, but I wanted a record that was the same length, kind of right in the same length as Stardust, which is 10 songs. Yeah, and so we just put 10 of the originals together to make the record. That's how it all happened.
Did you just get swept up in it, or was there a moment when you paused to kind of strategize? Or it's a pretty big moment, obviously, as an artist, to have been making music and at the level that you have for this long now, to have to just be like, you know what, yeah, I'm doing it.
I think making, like, Christmas of 2018 was when I first reached out to Booker about making a covers album. And I do think I wanted to make a covers album by myself, outside of my other bands. And obviously, I can't do anything by myself, but so I just brought in, I intended to bring in all my some of my favorite people to help me make this covers album, including Booker. And I did want to do that because I needed my own project. I wanted a respite from all the, we were working on Sleep Well Beast, and that rolled right into I'm Easy to Find really quickly, and touring. But then also, Corinne and my wife and I have been writing all these songs with Aaron and Bryce for Cyrano de Bergerac. This big Cyrano started out as like a small play with a few songs, and then it bloomed into a bigger play with a bunch of songs, and now it's turning into a movie with like we wrote 26 songs or something for it. So that project, Cyrano, started 5 years ago, while we were still doing stuff with Sleep Well Beast, and then I Am Easy to Find. So those were like big giant records that I think I wanted, about a year and a half ago. Like I said, I was ready to sort of, I wanted something that was in a drawer that no one else, could get into. And so I wrote all the lyrics by myself, and, I've been writing with Corinne for all those other projects. And this was nice to just like be writing songs, for myself, and thinking of all these covers. There was just, it was going to be my own little record. But it's shifting from covers to originals. What kind of happened in the process, and once I got done, I was like, well, I wasn't a little nervous about it. I mean, I was going to call it Matt Berninger's apostrophe S, Serpentine Prison. So it was going to be like a, Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, or who I can't remember was it the Who's Rock and Roll Circus or the Rolling Stones? Anyway, or it was like, a Matt Berninger and Friends type of thing. But Scott was like, just call it Matt Berninger. He's like, drop the apostrophe S, and so that was like, there was a moment I was like, oh, this is a solo album. But the minute I realized that it was a solo album, I got really excited about that, and I'm really happy that it is.
Was there ever a point in earlier in life when, you began to explore making music that you saw yourself as potentially being a solo artist?
No, I mean, no. I mean, and the funny thing is because I have a guitar finally, which I still haven't really learned how to play yet, and I don't really I can't play the piano. I can peck around on stuff, and I do use those things to write melodies sometimes, but I don't, not really. So the idea of making a solo album was never ever like on my mental, to-do list. It just wasn't, just because it didn't. It was kind of like, like, do you ever plan to, like, fly around the world in a single prop plane, or something like that? And I'm like, well, no, because I can't fly planes, or and then all of a sudden I realized, like, well, I can just, all these other people will help me make this. So it's, I had 20 people help me make a solo record, which is, I could not have gone solo without 25 other geniuses,
When did you first start to find that that music or melodies were occurring to you?
For this new stuff?
No, just ever in your life.
My first band, Nancy, like, I met Mike Brewer and Scott Devendorf and Casey Reese when I went to University of Cincinnati, and we were in school together for design school for 5 years there, and it was right towards the end of that where Mike Brewer was like, let's start a band, and I was like, well, can I be in it, and we were, and like, they let me name it after my mom, and it's just because I was just the most outgoing. I was always like, sort of like, whatever, ringleader of all kinds of stuff, and so I started singing and writing lyrics in that band, in the band called Nancy, and that was the first time I was like, oh, and I could be in a band, and the reason why I think I had the confidence to be in that band is because all of us, Mike Brewer and Scott and Casey and I, we were all, Casey was more into Kraftwerk and John Cage, but the rest of us were super into, like, Pavement and Guided by Voices and Silver Jews and stuff like that, and just Archers of Loaf, and like, there's all these, like, Cincinnati bands like Brainiac and Breeders and Afghan Wigs, and we're all close by, and being in near Dayton and Cincinnati back then in the mid to early 90s was like really, really, really fertile, and I think we all just, like, we can do this. And so, but yeah, that's when I first started writing and singing, and kind of realizing, like, maybe I could do this. And then, but that band, when we all graduated, that band sort of dissolved, and it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years later, after kind of setting up and being in New York, that the National kind of got together and started forming. But yeah, so the National never existed at all in Cincinnati. The National's first gig in Cincinnati, I think, was years after we started, and no one came. The National's never been a Cincinnati band or anything like that, but Nancy was my first band, and it was kind of started in that sort of college design art school scene in Cincinnati.
Right. So before that, you didn't find, like, as a teenager or whatever, that when you enjoyed music that you also generated ideas for music.
No, I didn't write a lyric. I didn't write a lyric or anything that would approximate a poem, until college, and not just like, I also went to 7 years of college. I went to 2 years at Miami University of Ohio, where I would go see music all the time. And the great radio station 97X was right out of Oxford, Ohio, WOXY, and I was, in seeing bands in Cincinnati. So I was absorbing. I was in the music scene. I was going to every show in Cincinnati, but it wasn't until those guys, Mike and Scott and Casey and I, got together. I don't even remember where we first started, what room we were in when we first started, with a 4-track. But when those guys gave me some 4-track stuff, where we were in a room together and they were playing guitars and stuff, I just gave it a shot, started singing, and I wrote and sang about, I think, half the songs on that record, and Mike Brewer wrote and sang most of the other ones. And, but before that, no, I like being a writer or being somebody who writes, I'd written notes and to girls. I'd written Valentines. I'd written notes to myself and buried them under trees and stuff like that. Yeah, I did. I totally did. And
What kind of a note? Wait, what kind of a note to yourself?
This is so weird. I do remember there's a park on the west side of Cincinnati called Mitchell Park, and we would always go hiking, just walks in the woods there, and there are creeks and ponds. It was just one of those like outskirts of towns, just protected parks and municipal park, and I would go. We would always go there, and just I would do that all the time. Just go hiking in the woods, and I was romantically obsessed with, like, girls and everything, and I would often I do remember writing a love letter to a girl, not giving it to her, but burying it under a tree, or I think it was more of a love letter to myself about, like, or something, and my dad would do that kind of stuff. I mean, my dad is always writing poems and little things for my mom, and my dad's always out in the woods, like, sketching lichen, and drawing, doing pencil sketches of moss and trees and creeks and stuff. My dad's my parents are artsy fartsy. I mean, he's a lawyer, but if he had chosen what to do without having to put his kids through school, he would have been a wandering sort of woodsy, whatever, John Muir type of guy,
Yeah. So were you? But did you find that you were drawn to music early? What were the things you were obsessed with first, like, as a little kid?
Well, as a little kid, my parents, there weren't that many records, but I've talked. They had about 20, and, like, I mean, Stardust came out in '78, and so I guess I keep trying to figure out, like, when did my parents go to a record store, and it must have been, in 1978. I feel like they went and bought 20 records, right? Like, the records I remember, there was like Old Waylon, which is a Waylon Jennings record that has, like, Willie on it. There's Killing Me Softly by Roberta Flack. There's Stardust. There's a Judy Collins album that's kind of one of her most famous, the best of. And part of me thinks they all came out. My parents went to some record store and bought all those the same day, and for the next decade, those were the only records we had, And so those records I mentioned, there's a Barry Manilow record in there, and they were always on, and my mom would put on Barry Manilow or the Grease soundtrack to get my sister and I to help her, like, scrub the kitchen floors or clean up, and so that was sort of just like the sonic textural environment that was always on as a kid. But then I think there was a long phase where I didn't really pay much attention to music, because all my friends were listening to, Rush and AC/DC and Van Halen, and I don't know. I feel like there was like a 4 or 5 year period until my sister brought home the Smiths and U2 and that kind of stuff, in Violent Femmes. And here's a really funny story. Here's a funny story that I've only told one other person, and this is in the 80s, and it was 86, and my family and all my cousins, the same cousins that had this farm, and I always, like, hang out with all these cousins. We went to Sanibel Island, Florida, in the summer of '86, like the spring, right when summer break came, and there was a guy named Adam Schoenfeld, who was from Brooklyn, who was kind of flirting with my sister, my older sister Rachel, and he gave her a mixtape, and it was called Licensed to Ill, and it was this little just mixtape of this Brooklyn hip hop band, and so I remember, and we listened to that little Maxell cassette tape over and over that summer, and License to Ill didn't come out till that fall. So I was listening to the Beastie Boys License to Ill like for 4 months or so before it even came out, because some guy had a crush on my sister. So I think I found like so much awesome music through my sister that way, and actually the Desners say the same thing. Their older sister Jess, dated a guy named Sven from a band called Lizard 99. That was a big band in Cincinnati, and he taught those guys how to play Minutemen songs, and but then they were also learning like Dave Matthews songs and everything, and so it was everybody has these weird sort of like things that informed their early collections, but
how did Adam Schoenfeld have License to Ill before?
I think he must have known that. He was from Brooklyn, and I don't know. He was friends. He went on to become. I had to look this up because I had to ask my sister what that guy. I remember his name was Adam, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he went on to be like a professional poker player and made a lot of money and like won a big poker tournament, and so he's out there. You can find him, and like I don't know if he remembers giving some blonde girl a cassette tape of License to Ill on a beach in Florida in the summer of '86, but he did, and I listened to it. Gosh. I listened to it all, and then it came out and changed the world, or it's just, and I'll say this honestly, it was like, I didn't listen to hip hop until then, it took the Beastie Boys, for me to sort of like, wait and that's, just shows you like, and then I got into the Public Enemy and Run DMC and started to that was my introduction to hip hop, and the Beastie Boys were, like a lot of people's introduction to hip hop outside of New York and stuff, and outside of like music, the music world. Morons like me, finally learned about hip hop from those dudes, and
you were like what, 10 years old or something?
86, I was 15.
15. Okay, well, whatever. Point being. Beastie Boys were my introduction to hip hop as well, and I grew up in New York, but they played Fight for Your Right to Party on the radio, and that was how I heard it. And I still remember being a kid and hearing that song and thinking like, how is this song that's so messed up so good, and like, why is it on the radio?
Well, and it's so, and License, I listened to License to Ill a bunch recently, and there's, like anything, there are problematic songs on there. There are songs that I'm sure they would never play again, like Brass Monkey, you really can't, like, Brass Monkey is not a cool song to play anymore. And there's, songs like Girls, there's all that stuff, but there was genuine, like so much progressive thinking inside of all their sort of bad boy antics, and there's something very positive, like party positive, and weirdly, and yes, there's a lot of toxic masculinity in hip hop and in early Beastie Boys and all rock and roll, indie rock from 2 years ago. I guess like it is funny, you forget. Someone gives you a mixtape or some little thing somewhere, and you check it out and you get into it, and you don't realize that thing is gonna affect you for the rest of your life, and you're gonna keep going back to it. And like sometimes you never know. Then again, at the same time, there's a million albums where I've listened to for 2 weeks and thought it was the masterpiece, and then I've never listened to it again, and I've tried and like, oh nope, that wasn't as good as I remembered, that month when I was in college. But other records just like are evergreen, and so like I talk about The Queen is Dead a lot, and so I think I discovered The Queen is Dead and License to Ill, at like the same time, right around the same time, and also at the same time I was still kind of listening to some Van Halen and with all my friends and stuff. So yeah, it's funny that the ingredients that make up your musical sort of instincts or your musical tastes,
Yeah, I wonder, I've never heard your first band, Nancy, but did you sing then the way you sing now? Like what was
I sang. I sang It was kind of just like a jackassy sort of like, it was definitely a guided by voice. It was the closest thing would be Pavement or Guided by Voices. And there's a song on there called like Florida Girls, and they're Breathing Test, and they're all just kind of, and they're good, but they're sophomoric,
Right. But I just mean, I guess even just like you have a very distinctive style of singing. Like, did it take you a while to kind of find your register and your cadence? And
I think in that band I was mostly, I didn't croon at all. I think I went from like, in that band I was like barking and honking, a lot of barking and honking, and then I moved from barking and honking to like muttering and mumbling, in the National, and then I think went back to some, went from mumbling to mumble barking, then to screaming, and now I'm somewhere in like I'm in a crooning zone or something. I don't know. I have tried I've tried to cover hip hop songs I like. I've tried to and like there are songs that I do that I'm like I was talking to Sam from Future Islands, and he really started out more in hip hop, and like getting into like crooning and being in an indie rock band was his sort of sidestep out of hip hop. And I often like wonder how often he's like, when he's singing in Future Islands, does he want to slip into a more speedy wordy flow like he does with Hemlock Ernst, and like I don't know if he even answered that because it's like one of those questions is like, it's, you just kind of swim in the water you're in. But yeah, but when we were in the studio with Booker making all these records, we tried to do Sabotage. We like for about half an hour, we all, like, I can't remember who all was in the room at that point, but the 4 or 5 of us who were there early that morning were like, let's try to do it was my idea. Like, let's just, why not? Let's try to do Sabotage. And it was, it was kind of like, it was trying to lift a plane off the ground with donkeys. So we just couldn't do it. It was like, how do you like we could not get that one to take off. And it's like some songs are just uncoverable. Has anybody covered Sabotage? They must have.
I don't know about like a recorded cover. I've seen people do it, at festivals and stuff like that. But
oh, you have? Yeah, I've never seen it. I mean, I just don't know how could you pull it off? I guess he could. It's just a rock song, really, but it's just so, it's hard to explain. It's like you can't do some songs. Maybe just we couldn't do it. But anyway, but even like the Cure's In Between Days in the studio with Booker, like we only got it halfway there, and we ran out of time, but later I went back in and re-sang it and had Julia Laws sing on it. So some of the songs, some of the covers we did died in the room, and some were only sort of half baked when we finished. But then Holes is the one we like, okay, we finished, because Booker was in love with it, and so I went back and sang it, and we just released that. I'm sorry, In Between Days, by The Cure, but we just released that for a thing on Bandcamp. But and then Mercury Rev cover Holes, we did that in these sessions, and that came out for something else. But yeah, covering songs was really helpful for me to just learn song structures and all the different ways of melody and stuff like that. And anytime I've covered something, I've taken a lot out of the experience, even a failure. When you like, we covered, the National covered Desolation Row once by Dylan, and it was a pretty massive failure. But it was like good to do it.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to release it. I think it was like Uncut Magazine wanted to put it on their their cover mounted CD thing, and Roger Trust from Beggar's Banquet, from our label back then, said, "I don't know, guys. I think maybe you guys just keep this one for yourself." And he was right. Sometimes it's just because you do a cover doesn't mean you should.
How has your approach to lyric writing, or your kind of process of lyric writing, evolved since you first started?
Well, I described it recently, and I was like, oh, that's a good way to describe it, so I'll do it again. But lyric writing used to be, I used to like climbing, like free climbing, like a rock face, where like every word was like, okay, you had to find, like, every line or every verse was like trying to get up 2 more feet up that rock face until you can finish this song, and it was always scary to humiliate yourself with a stupid lyric or an embarrassing thing. And I was always, but the music I liked did those things, like the Tom Waits and Leonard Cohen and Nick Cave and Nina Simone and Cat Power and people put the raw weird stuff. If you don't put the raw, Liz Phair, I remember being obsessed with Exile in Guyville because of all the bravery in her writing and stuff. So when you go at it and want to go into that direction and compete with those artists, it's easy to sound like a total idiot when you dig in deep into things that maybe, I don't know. And so I was nervous. And so it took me a while to dig deep. It took me a while to learn how to like not be nervous that you can't fall off this rock face. And then I said over the years I learned to not climb up from the bottom, just go look around for cliffs to jump off, and they're everywhere, and because it's rock and roll, it's music. It's like you jump off, and you like, if you jump off of a high cliff in art, you're gonna fly, whether you're a painter or anything, you'll fly. You might fly into the ocean or into the trees, and it may not be the best thing, but that's the only way to make art is to just let go, let go and just let it all just fly out of your brain, and then you craft it later. You craft it into a good song, but the writing, the art part of just like getting the words collected, they don't have to be in the right order. 90% of them you can get rid of, and you can just cherry pick it for your favorite stuff and then craft it into a song later. But if you're gonna write, you gotta start writing, and you just have to start doing it. It's like getting, if you want to learn how to swim, you have to jump in water. You have to dive it. You have to jump into a pond somewhere or a swimming pool, and it's always terrifying. And then after a while, you're like, oh, look, I can breathe underwater.
How far into making albums with the National did you start to feel like some confidence develop in the process, where you had begun to figure that out and let yourself flow a bit more?
Well, there were different stages of confidence. Like, just like the first time we made something that sounded like a song at all, like that, I'd say that with any band. Like the first time you get a bunch of people together and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of like a good song I haven't heard before. That's a huge leap. And then the first time you get on stage at like Mercury Lounge, that's a massive leap. But as a writer, I feel like around Cherry Tree, About Today was a big song. I feel like About Today was like, oh, that's a different thing I did there, And then Boxer, Boxer was a big moment because we were, Alligator was big. That was because it was a real record on a real label, and we were like, oh my God, we're actually a band, and we were suddenly kind of being mentioned in the same articles as Interpol and all these bands that we were like way behind. The record after Boxer was when I think our band sort of wrestled control over our trajectory, and not necessarily from anyone else. Like the label did put a little pressure on us to like have a screaming rock song on Boxer, and I remember really resisting that. I was really into sort of like The Boatman's Call by Nick Cave and stuff, and I'm like, there's no, I don't know, but probably, I can't remember, but it's like, Boxer didn't need an available or an able, the things that were on Alligator that I guess got the most attention. I'm like, well, if we just get attention for those, then I'm gonna have to write screamy songs for the rest of my life. I just like, if we can't get attention on these like more mellow songs, we're not gonna last very long. And so Boxer was where I think I felt like I became a writer, a much better writer. And then singing just slowly, and then being a performer on stage, much later too. Just only in the past 5 years have I felt something approximating comfortable.
You seem quite comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I am comfortable on stage now. I do. I mean, it's scary. It is, like skydiving, but I know how to land now, and and I know I'm not gonna die, I get hurt all the time, but I mean, like, I can't. It's almost. I've humiliated myself so many times on stage in that nobody seems to notice or care, and I'm just like, oh, wow, I mean, I've fallen apart. I've like broken into like open sobbing on stage before, and all you do is just turn your back for 5 minutes and pull it together, and then turn around and go on to the next song. Nobody can tell. It's like it's and nobody wants you to like people go see live stuff because they want to see something that could turn into a disaster any second. It's like Leonard Cohen always talks about, like, the possibility for humiliation and failure and disaster every time you step on stage is immense. It's everywhere, and that's the thrill. It's kind of like, I mean, but not real disaster, only just like artistic disaster.
Momentary
Disaster. And artistic disaster is sort of the definition of art, right? It's like the first time Jackson Pollock, did one of those things that you probably thought, what a disaster. And then he's like, wait, there's something here, Anyway, I mean, anytime that an artist does something that they're like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble for this piece of art, or this performance is going to, I'm going to get a shitty review. I did something bad. I stepped too far over a line, whatever that is. Every time, that's the work that matters. I mean, that's almost always the most important work, the stuff you're most afraid of. So, so I learned that. I learned, like, even the worst stage situation is always ends up making you a better artist, and you learn so much from that. Failure. I said it's failure. Lots of failure is like the fertilizer for success. It's like, or the fertilizer for ideas, for new directions. You gotta walk into walls and crash into trees to find a more interesting path.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess also in another respect, disasters are fodder for ideas. In a lyrical sense, I mean, I want to pivot into talking a bit about when you are writing lyrics nowadays, and specifically for this album, because you were returning to doing it on your own and not collaborating with Corinne as you had been, like, where do you go? What is there a certain kind of ambiance that you need to have to be sort of effective at writing lyrics? And also, just how do you connect with sort of previous emotional disasters to find, to find these songs that you write that are so devastating, and if one didn't know better, they'd be like, this guy must have a miserable life.
That's so funny. That's the first time I've been asked, how do I connect to previous emotional disasters? Yeah, I mean, aren't we always constantly connected to all of our, previous and future emotional disasters? It's like, I think sometimes people are writing like warnings to themselves about future mistakes, and yeah, I mean, but when I'm writing, I don't know. When I'm writing, I'm just writing, and I have people. A lot of people have Serpentine Prison. A lot of people have asked me, like, this record sounds like a cry for help. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that is. But I mean, it's a and Corinne, by the way, is like, was hearing all my words and sketches and demos from the beginning, and and so I did have like an editor or support, but she wasn't really. She was so involved in I'm Easy to Find and all the Cyrano stuff, and frankly, she didn't have any time to help me with this, but yeah, it's like I do always dig into all my biggest anxieties, but they're not always not always autobiographical. Like, there's a song called "Oh Dearie," which is has some brutal lines about depression, and I do suffer from sort of low grade waves of ups and downs, which is, I think, pretty average. I don't suffer from, like, I'm not on antidepressants, and I've never felt the need, and which is, I feel really lucky. But I know a lot of people who are and do need that. And what talking to them, what it's like inside that level of depression, where like you're like zero serotonin, and where you don't have the mental ambition to stand up. You can't muster, a phone call. You can't answer a phone call. You can't turn on the television. You just, I know, because I've been in those moments, for like 5 minutes. I've been there, but I know people that get stuck in those moments for months, and that's, you have to take care of yourself. And so I think Oh Dearie is a lot about just empathy for that level of sorrow, and but like, again, like people like so yeah, the record is a cry for help, but it's just like more of a general, not specifically for me. I mean, there's a lot of it. I do. A lot of the record is so much of it is about being exhausted or disconnected, or feeling isolated or wanting to feel isolated. Yeah, totally. That's all real, very genuine. I do want to slow down. I do. I am exhausted. I am, the anxiety level of the past 15, 20 years. Since for me it started when George W. Bush won. I just like, wait, what? How?
Yeah.
And then 9/11, and then and then just all the tragedies, the atrocities, and yes, and yeah, Trump, and then the pandemic. It's a series. It's a series of traumas, and I think, the generation. But I talked to my dad about it, and he's like, yeah, these are trying times. These are dark times. He said, but we've been here before, in different versions. Where we are now is very, very, very grim, and very. But I also think we're on the cusp of a better America. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, in a more true and honest version of ourselves. We have to be. So I'm always optimistic. In this record, like in all these records, like I've been listening to so many records during this time that were written, 50 years ago, and just records that are just like honest about the emotional weight or of the world on whether it's Neil Young or Nick Cave or Nina Simone, right? When they honestly express, like, here's my feeling about this party, here's my feeling about this country, here's my feeling about, but in personal ways, it's resonant at all times. It's always resonant. And so this record I wrote way before pandemic, or it was done before the pandemic, but I can feel it's comforting to me now, and just like Neil Young's Harvest is super comforting to me during this, and Stardust is comforting to me during all this. Ghosteen is comforting to me during all this, and none of those records were written with any of this in mind.
Right. Talk to me a little bit specifically about One More Second, because I love that song so very much. B, I have a couple of friends who are immediately post-breakup and have been listening to nothing but One More Second by Matt Berninger. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that song and kind of how it developed.
Yeah, it's a desperate. I did. Well, I wrote that with Matt Sheehy, who's also goes by Lost Lander, and he's in Elvi, and the minute like he sent me, there was just something instantly infectious about the guitar sketch he sent me, so I think I wrote it pretty quick, or at least that chorus I think I wrote really quick, and that chorus became sort of the hook or something, and but I did want. I intended, and even talking with Booker, is like, I want this one to be big, to be a classic love song, and so we talked about songs like Nothing Compares to You, or Hopelessly Devoted to You, or something, or like even the reason I covered Betty Swan's Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye, it's a very similar song to "Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye." It's like sure, you can say goodbye after a million years. Just wait a million years and then you can leave. Like no problem. Of course, you can go whenever you want after a million years. And so that's kind of is a version of that. But also, I was thinking, "I Will Always Love You," Dolly Parton's song, where she wrote it when she was leaving Porter Wagner's TV show, right? And so she literally it's and there's a spoken word thing in the middle of it. It's like it's literally a Dear John letter to Porter Wagner in song, and it became the biggest song, one of the biggest songs of all time. And I just thought it was funny. Well, what would if Porter Wagner, could write a pop song in response, trying to hold on to Dolly? It might be something like "One More Second," So, and it was just fun to make. Brent playing piano and sliding over, and then Booker picking up the with Hammond organ after Brent's stuttering piano. It's just like magical things happened. Every song, there was always magical moments that were unwritten. They were just like happened, instinctually. And that one's got a bunch of them. And it's got Gail on it. I think it's got Andrew Bird all over it. It's just got everybody. It's got, yeah. It was a fun one.
Yeah, I'm reminded too of not. It's a different tempo song, but of Dylan's "Most of the Time."
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yeah, I was listening to Mosto over and over. Yeah. Is that on No Mercy?
It's yeah. Oh Mercy, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was talking about that, and I can't remember who it was. It was Josh Kaufman. He's like, "Oh yeah, Mosto." I didn't like real Dylan fans. Like when you talk to super Dylan fans, there's always a short version of every song title. I'm like, "What song are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, Most of the Time." But yeah, no, that's what Dylan's got. Dylan's got 20 of those songs. Like Dylan's got, whatever, like Visions of Johanna and and Sarah.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the thing where it's like also just the song. There's the conceit of the song. The conceit of the song is cool. Is like interesting. Where you're like, oh, that's what the you know what I mean? Like,
it's like this is. I feel all these ways most of the time. Yeah, it's like totally. No, yeah. Oh God, that's like when he came up with that, he's like, oh shit. If I keep coming back to the words most of the time, I can do anything else around that, and it just lands. He just found a perfect landing phrase for any random thought, It's like calling something or maybe not, It's like no matter what you say, and then you end it with or maybe not. It's just like, oh, I love that song, It's because it's.
Oh yeah, and it just gets more brutal with each verse, when he gets to I don't even notice that she's gone. You're just like, oh God, Bob. Kill me now.
Dylan writes about longing and resentment and pain. I remember he's got a line that says, "I can't even touch the books she read," and I can't remember what that's off of.
On Idiot Wind, yeah. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe.
Oh God, yeah. He's so angry, but I bet he had it coming, right? But then also Dylan also can be really direct, like in Sarah, that's a direct song, it's a very direct song about the mother of his children and everything, and yeah, he can do anything, and but then there's so many artists. Dylan is held as the greatest, but I think Nick Cave is coming up on him. I think Nick Cave is for me as a writer and a lyricist might even be lapping Dylan now, and
oh yeah,
I don't know. I'm like, why not? As he should.
Yeah, just another one of my where I'm just like, holy shit, the pearls of lyrics are just, how does he do? Are there writers? Do you like study the written word or whatever?
Not the written word, but I study records. I read. I'm an audiobook guy more than mostly just because my glasses are so scratched up and shitty. I can barely read. But yeah, no, music has been my. Art and design and drawing, and I love all that stuff. But in terms of like literature, music has really been the literature I've paid most attention to, and so yes, and Nick Cave is probably a writer I've read, quote unquote, or listened to or paid attention to, maybe more than any other, I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody. I just there are songs of his that you go back to and you're just like, you can't believe how they continue to unfold. And same thing with Dylan, and same thing with Tom Petty. I've been listening to so much Tom Petty, and I forgot how serious one should take Tom Petty's writing. Like, Jesus. Sometimes,
well, yeah, because the catchier the song is, the easier it is
to forget how progressive and dark and revealing, and that's Tom Petty is like that, and it's easy to think of like Nick Cave and Leonard Cohen and such people as these dark, brooding people, or me, because of like the tenor of the way they deliver a song, or their voice. But you take Tom Petty, or who's or even Willie Nelson, who are they're tenors, literally. I think I don't know if Tom Petty is a tenor, but and you don't think of how or Bruce Springsteen. People don't think of Bruce Springsteen as like a melancholic artist, but good God, if you listen to Nebraska, it's like, or Nirvana. Obviously we think of Nirvana as a dark, thing, but what it Smells Like Teen Spirit just sounded like a party of pain, like the best time. Same thing with License to Ill, and usually those kind of things, really help people feel better, and I'm sure they did for Kurt Cobain, and even though maybe didn't escape it all the sorrow, but all that stuff. Yeah, if writers, those are the writers that I read. And it's not like I just sit there and read their lyrics. It never works. I hate reading lyrics. I don't even like putting the lyrics that much in books, even though I do it and put them in the albums, because it's I know why it's useful. But it's like song lyrics on paper are like fish on a beach, and so when I'm writing, if there isn't music on, or don't have a rhythm in my head, or a pattern and a tone or a melody, I can't really write, right? I don't sit there and just write. And like writing an email for me is like, ugh. Anything.
But once you're in the mode where you're listening to some music with the idea that you're going to see if this inspires anything from you, does it happen pretty quick? Like, if it's going to happen, does it happen pretty quickly?
Here's an example. I was listening to Lou Reed's Sword of Damocles off of Magic and Loss, and I hadn't heard that for a long time. I got a cassette, and I was like, oh, there's Magic and Loss on cassette, because I got a tape deck, and so I started playing it, and that song comes along. And I was like, oh shit! I was like, I wanted to listen to that again. And then with a cassette, you have to get to zoom back and find the spot, right? And it was really funny. I was like, I'll just put it on Spotify. And I was like, no, do it like you did it in the 80s. You have to rewind the cassette to that spot to start over this one song, And that was kind of fun to do, like lifting up the needle and trying to set it back at the beginning of a song over and over again. Makes you pay even closer attention, and then it makes you study the song. And so, and then I put it on Spotify and had it on repeat. And then I think I wrote not the same vocal pattern he was doing, but just there's a strumming pattern that's just got a whatever it is, the riff, that just over and over again, and the time signature of it is just like infectious. And so I wrote probably 10 songs in 3 or 4 days of different melodies and different things, and all just to that pattern I had in my head. And I was writing while I was on my bike. I was waking up in the morning, and I was writing these songs, and they were all Sword of Damocles, children of Damocles, the Sword of Damocles, but all different sort of patterns, in like, some with lots of words, some with like spaced out, and all different melodies. So a bit of music is sort of like a jungle gym, and you can do any kind of swinging around on it you want. It's just an armature, and you can drape it with any color fabric of a melody that you want to. And I mean, it's literally, it's like when you get a song stuck in your head. I mean, like it's you get a pattern stuck in your head. It's like a Dr. Seuss thing, right? It's in Serpentine Prison. The last song on the record is really, really. I was reading a lot of Dr. Seuss. In fact, it's actually this Robert Lopshire book named called "Put Me in a Zoo," but Dr. Seuss edited it, and I guess Robert Lopshire was a protege of Dr. Seuss. But it's just like children's book have these great rhythms and rhymes and patterns, and the rhymes are a device to sort of trick you to pay attention, and so like the Cat in the Hat is super, super progressive, and so is this Robert Lopshire "Put Me in a Zoo." These are really progressive ideas, sort of cloaked inside these clever, fun, sweet little rhymes, and these kids and dogs and cats and stuff and fish. If you read Cat in the Hat, and the fish, is like all these warnings, and the parents are out of town, and it's in this strange wild thing shows up, and it's all the progressive ideas that children are grappling with and kind of processing through those sweet books, where all really that's what Dr. Seuss intended, right? Things that would help children understand their own anxieties, and so a good song gets stuck in your head, like Serpentine Prison. I remember, like, I had a pattern in my head for that song, and I just kept writing and writing to it. Same thing with "Not in Kansas," from on the National's "I'm Easy to Find." That one I wrote 30 different stanzas of that thing. It's only half as long as it originally was, but you get that pattern in your head, and then you can kind of write about all the most weirdest, darkest, strangest things, and you put it in a cute little rhyming pattern, and it like Serpentine Prison, I was writing, I knew my daughter was going to hear the song, and so I wrote about my daughter, and and all the things that my anxieties for her, my own anxieties and my anxieties for her, and the things that she learns from me, and I couched it all inside a Dr. Seuss thing. But it wasn't a big plan. It wasn't like, okay, what I'm going to do is write a Dr. Seuss type of song for my daughter. It was just you just start doing that. You just read a bunch of Dr. Seuss, and next thing you know, you're writing a Dr. Seuss song. Right?
Does she like it?
That's her favorite song on the record by far. Yeah, she knows all the words. It's so funny to hear her sing about Girl Scout cookies and drool, because she doesn't realize I'm not talking about cookies yet.
I freaking love Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, no, I do too.
That one and Blue Dream. Top faves over here.
That's so funny. Yeah, whenever the Girl Scout cookies girls come to the door, I'm like, "Do you guys have sour diesel?" And they're like, "Excuse me."
Get me some OG Kush, gals.
Yeah, so it's funny. But the really funny thing about it is that all the parents at my daughter's school, I'm actually really happy that that there's no in-session school right now. Well, when this record's coming out, because there's so many questionable parenting behaviors that are revealed in this thing. That I just like, all the parents at my daughter's school are like, I just don't want to look anybody in the eye for a few months.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for connecting to talk with me. Yeah. Always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Honestly, that was one of my favorite conversations I've had on the LSQ podcast to date, so massive, massive thanks again to Matt Berninger, whose beautiful new Serpentine Prison is out now. And episode 53, in a couple more weeks, includes a conversation with Charlatan's Tim Burgess. You should check out his Twitter listening party if that's not something you've experienced yet. And subscribe as well. Reach me with feedback and questions on Twitter @JennyLSQ. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you next time.